I got great news. I've got tragic news. You got to deal with both here. The great news is, paper pop, Clemson has landed several big-time verbal commits this past weekend. The tragic news is certain portions of Clemson internet culture have lost their collective minds. So sometimes on this show, I have been accused of being unclear, speaking in vague terms, so I can circle back and deny that I said something, which I absolutely do. However, in this case, I'm not guilty of it. This is definitely not a situation, contrary to what the internet will tell you in some circles, that I've been unclear about things. And the way I know that is because I've had a feeling about Clemson for about 3 years now. I've been vocal about it for about a year and a half. So I don't need you to take my word for it. In just a second, I'll have Director Colin do what we call presenting evidence, which is where I claim I said something, then I play myself saying it. Or on the flip side, if you claim I said something, you could also present that same evidence. And there's a lot of that circulating. I'll address all of this, but here's the good news. Clemson made some noise in recruiting this weekend. So what happens when Clemson now lands some kids in recruiting is not only do they land them, I go and look for updates, and I see my name plastered all over the place with people calling me out. What do you have to say now? Boy, where's Josh Pate now? I'm right here. What are you talking about? Well, you're going to backtrack? What do I need to backtrack on? You said Clemson was finished. I never did. So, Colin, the day after National Signing Day, when they had landed a class outside the top 25, albeit it was a smaller class, so even if we factor that in and go by average player grade, they were in the mid-teens. I said some things about Clemson. You don't need to take my word for it. Well, you do, but you need to hear my actual words I said. Mind you, this is like 2 months ago, month and a half ago. Let's roll it. This is 3 straight cycles. Clemson's recruiting is finished outside the top 10. This one finished outside the top 25. It's not a fringe issue. They're not close. Let me put it plainly. Clemson's football players that they are accumulating on that roster are not going to be good enough to meet the standard they've set there. Unless something drastic changes or unless their development laps the rest of the sport or the recruiting rankings were just totally flawed. Unless something like that is amiss, they're not going to be able to keep up. This year's team will actually be their best shot over the next several years. That's the way it looks to me right now. So that's the way it looked. And now Clemson's landed a few big-time kids. So my consistent feel, which hasn't changed on Clemson, is it's the top program in the ACC. Recruiting has regressed. Hey, quick timeout. Check and see if you're subscribed to the channel. If you're not, make sure you do. It's free. It doesn't obligate you or sign you up for anything. It just helps us keep the channel free. All right, back to the show. The overall product on the field has regressed. The talent roster has regressed. The current mode that they find themselves in is incapable of matching the standard they set for themselves in the mid to late 20-teens. That's how I felt about Clemson. It's still how I feel about Clemson. Up until this moment, it's still how I feel about them. So what we just said there is not they're terrible, they suck, they're falling into the abyss. It's they were on rung 10 of college football's ladder. They're on about rung 7 right now. And if they maintain this pace, they won't fall below 6, but they will not elevate back up to 10. Or, put a different way, it's going to take something above and beyond what they're doing right now. So we got a nice solid blip on the recruiting radar screen this past weekend. Not a slam dunk, not definitive proof of anything, but it's good. So there's no denying that. It's good, especially at the receiver position. It's good. But I know how this works. It works the same way every time. Weirdly, it's this way with Clemson more so than other programs. I don't know what that is, but what happens is most people who start criticizing me on this front don't watch this show. So they see someone over on like TigerNet or someone like that claim I said something, which in and of itself is a lie, and then they believe it and they run with it, and then they have this entire like misconception in their mind about what was said. The folks who watch the show are normally the ones who come in the replies and say, yeah, it's actually not what he said. So I get it. I get that there's a little minority on the internet that always does that. But to be very clear, after the Louisville game this past year, we went on the show. I think I spoke about as directly about the state of Clemson football as I had in quite a while. Because I'm normally not negative towards these folks, just not. I like it to be a last resort. But Louisville went in there and just owned them. And I thought it did some pretty irreversible damage. And I went back and watched that clip today because a lot of you threw it at me. Even the way I felt the day after that game was the scene was pretty shocking. If you really think about that, a road team in Clemson Stadium having the game in hand was a very weird feeling to me. And I remember the feedback I got after that segment. You'll not believe this. The feedback I got from Clemson folks was overwhelming support for having said it. Now, I looked in my DMs today, just out of curiosity, and some of the people who trashed me today, if you scrolled up and looked at their message history, were the ones who were backslapping me and high-fiving me when I said what I said after the Louisville game. It's just funny how that works. So I feel the same way. It takes more than a good recruiting weekend to reverse that. This was good, but it's always been layered for me with Clemson. Dabo has built something there that is such that it's never going to fall off a cliff. They're never going to torpedo into the mountainside. It's just that the standard was a national championship. It was them in Alabama. That's what it was in the mid-2010s. So to ever get back there, that roster has to look the way it did. Maybe this is the first step towards getting there. This year's team, I think, is going to be good. I've said that every step of the way. This year's team should be the favorite to win the ACC. It's beyond 2025. That's when I wonder the most. That's when I have the most doubt. Love the vibe, though. I think he's hired really well. Dabo is who I'm talking about. I think he's hired very aggressively. This is a good sign. Okay, it's a good sign. I'm not going to get carried away with it. It's a good sign. That's where I am with Clemson right now.